we'll have a
muted?
bit of
Oh,
discussion
am I
pretty soon.
muted?
So get ready to turn off the
Oh, I'm muted on
microphones
the
and chime
that's
in,
from
or
the
use
Zoom.
the or use your
Anyway,
chat feature,
tonight we're going to
or feel
be
free to
sitting in
ask
on
Zach
Mike Hoag's
questions
class
too.
again. The topic tonight is on
Okay,
soils. So we'll
so
get
here we
into it
are.
right
I
now.
will share this in the chat too. Fun stuff here. Oh, as we see here, we're going to be talking about transforming soils. We're going to cover some soil science basics. By the way, what does that mean? To me, when we start talking about soil science basics, what's really important is this thing we've talked about a lot in this class, the 80-20 principle, right? We know that 20% of our actions will cause 80% of our results. 20% of our actions will get us 80% of the benefit. So I'm gearing this whole talk to the 20% that I think will have a huge impact on your actual gardening. And I'm thinking this way because I recently watched a YouTube video on soils from a permaculture perspective, and it said, it started out with this promise that it would absolutely change the way you're gardening, and for me, it didn't give me anything that changed my gardening. So it did let me know a lot more about what's going on with microbes and stuff. But then, and then the person wanted to sell me some microbes. They had this like designer microbe spray they wanted me to buy and put in my garden. It's like, well, I already have a rockin' garden. Why do I need some microbe spray? So this is something I'll leave as sort of a challenge. As we go through, we're going to try to make these topics practical and give you practical things you can do in the garden. So I'd like you to think about that. What are some take homes? What are some things that you can pick up from this talk that will actually be useful in your garden, that you'll actually be able to put to use? So you see right here in the top is 6 keys to holistic soil regeneration. So we're already seeing we're going to be thinking much more holistically in this talk. And we'll get into what these 6 keys are as we go forward. And, I want to point to one right away on the top left. It says, have goals. The soil state supports your goals. If I could leave you with one thing, it would be that as we think about soils, we're not thinking about them in an abstract way. We're setting goals and thinking about how we can use and manage soils to support our goals, and really have it be that sort of way. The cutting edge in research-based approaches to ecology management is called priorities-based management. And it's all based on this idea that we always start with goals. And that's how permaculture starts too. And it showed just one other thing in here that's a little bit different than other approaches. It says, the one under that says value terroir. Terroir is a word that means, it's French for earth. And what it means is the taste of the soil. And it's often used in wine. And it means that, like, we don't necessarily want to have a perfect wine. That's boring. What we want to have is a unique wine that really tastes like the place it comes from, that tastes like the soil, that tastes like the sun of the Mediterranean, if that's where it's from, that has unique properties to its own region. And this is a really important idea in food and farming, that a lot of our best produce, our most nutrient dense produce, does not come from perfect soils. It actually comes from soils that are imperfect or perhaps lacking certain nutrients or certain things like that. These imperfect soils give us unique, wonderful, flavorful, nutrient-dense produce in a lot of ways. So as we think about soils, we're not trying to think that we need perfect soil, that we have to amend soil for its own benefit. We amend soil if it fits our goals and it's required, and we're careful not to lose the terroir elements, to lose what's special about our own soil. So those are two basic ideas of our 6 keys of holistic soil regeneration that we'll kind of start this talk on. And next up here, before we have a little bit of a discussion, that's coming next, so get ready. I have 2 hypothetical questions just to sit with you. One is, why does clay end up in all the low spots and areas? This gives us a chance to call back to last class when we were looking at landscape geography and looking at those spots we called key points, low places, indentions in the landscape that collect water. Oftentimes, if you go grab a shovel and you dig in one of those, you'll find that that area has the most clay particles in it. That usually has the richest soil, and often those spots just seem to catch and hold water and nutrients better than the other places in the landscape. But why? Why is that? What are some of the factors involved in that? We'll think about that as we go, but it's just a great question to prime our minds for what we'll be talking about today. Maybe you already have some answers for that. So my objectives tonight are to give you a general modern understanding of soil, and 2, to show systems thinking patterns for soil management, which is, I think, a different approach than most people are used to. So hopefully this kind of approach will be as transformative and mind-blowing for you as it has been for me. And one other topic before we talk for a few minutes. Here's a picture, and this is not a before and after picture of soil here on the right. This is actually an after and after picture. So this picture was taken in year 6 at Lily House, and it was taken from 2 beds with the same soils that are just a few feet apart. So here's the thing to understand. One of these 2 soils had yearly additions of compost. Every year, an inch at least of compost added to the soil for 6 years. The other one never had any additives at all, ever. But it was a productive garden bed. So which do you think is which? Which one of these 2 soils looks like it got the good compost treatment, and which one didn't get any compost? I'm sure you have guesses about it.
Yeah, the one on the right looks like it got the compost.
Yeah, the one on the right certainly looks like it would get the compost because it's got all this richness to it. You can see from the color, the darker black color, that has more of this good stuff we want, organic matter, right? Carbon in it is this black quality to soil. It also looks like it has notice how it looks like it has chocolate cake crumbs. That's soil structure. That's a really important quality of soil, the fact that it has this cake-like crummy structure. Well, of course you gave the answer that I wanted you to give, and of course it's a trick question. So I would use the example if it wasn't. So thank you for playing along and giving the answer that I wanted. Of course. So, but what's really going on here is the soil on the left had compost dug into it, an inch of compost every year for 6 years, and was and continued to be used. The soil on the right never had any compost or amendments of any kind added to it. What it had was continuous cover of plants in polyculture and deep mulch. And because of that, the soil actually maintained very high fertility and good levels of nitrogen and very high productivity every year without adding any compost to it. It also never required, because it was continuously covered in plants and deep mulch, it never required any weeding. It conserved water a lot better. and the plants usually have fewer pest issues. So this is a really interesting point. I worked so hard to keep the soil fertility up on that soil on the left, and 6 years into it, in the middle of summer, it still ended up looking like this. Whereas without doing any extra work like that, like composting and adding soil amendments, the soil on the right looks like this. So we're going to talk tonight about some paradigms of soil management that will allow you to be as lazy as me and have beautiful, productive soil. I'm going to give a little space there in case anyone wants to add to that. I see Noah said, Bill Molson said composting wasted a huge amount of your nutrients. That is absolutely true. When you compost, a good percentage of the nitrogen, especially, it's probably at a minimum 30%, and in a lot of cases 60%, are lost to the oxygen or lost to the atmosphere and to soil water. So just right there, even a lot of the carbon is lost. A lot of other nutrients break down and get lost because they're water soluble too. So if you're doing, composting is good.
I was going to say, what am I supposed to do with my food scraps and chicken bedding then?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the good things to do about composting. We're going to talk a lot about composting tonight, but it's not necessarily the end of our path or the only tool we have. So we're going to talk about that. All right. So good. I'm glad that you're asking that question already, and I hope that you will have some good answers to those questions by the time we're done here. But yes, I actually compost a fair bit. I have a whole system that I'm going to tell you about. It's a zone system of composting where we use like 7 different types of composting to make composting really, really easy, and to minimize those nutrient losses that we were talking about as well. Oh, yeah, we can only do raised beds here unless we rotate our chickens. Yeah. And you can do these kinds of techniques in raised beds as well. So we'll see some cool techniques and ideas here. Well, this brings us to this question: why do we care about soil anyway? Why are we spending some time talking about this stuff? Isn't it just dirt? Isn't it just dirt? You stick some plants in and you give them fertilizer and they grow. I think that's the old view, right? Soil is just inert substance that you put the soil just held the plants in place while you fed them synthetic fertilizer and watered them and stuff like that. We know now that's completely a terrible idea of soil. It's really destructive to soil and to the whole planet. So so these two questions kind of go together. And what do you want to know about soil? Well, let's start with this idea. Why do we care about soil? What's going on with soil? Why are we talking about it? What are some reasons?
Well, from a global perspective, we are losing topsoil at a rapid and unsustainable rate.
Yeah, absolutely. At such a fast rate that the United States has lost more than 75% of its topsoil, and by best estimates, we only have a global reserve of 60 years of topsoil left at the rate we're currently using it. And that number is much more shocking than it sounds, because it's not just that we have, some journalists have translated it as that we have 60 harvests left. That's it. But it's actually more shocking than that, because as that topsoil declines, a whole lot of very important things like water holding and all that is also going to get a lot harder. So it's it's already hard, and it's going to get harder and harder the more of that topsoil we lose. And where is it going, Joe asked? Well, a whole lot of it, this was a beautiful American system. A lot of it gets tilled, and then it goes and washes out into our because we treat it like it's dead, once there's no soil life, the soil washes away really easily, and that soil life just washes once it's dead, the soil washes out and it goes into our waterways. It causes a lot of pollution. Yeah, we treat soil like dirt, and then it washes out and creates the ocean dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And now we know we're actually creating, to our American style of agriculture, ocean dead zones all over the world. So this is one of our most successful American exports. We are exporting ocean dead zones around the world. So, so that's one of the places it's going. Of course, a lot of the things like the carbon go up into the atmosphere when we burn them off. So a lot of nutrients get, another place that it goes is we take the nutrients out of the soil in the form of produce, and we eat those. And then what would a smart civilization do with vital, life-giving nutrients that feed agriculture? Well, we flush them down the toilet, mix them with poisons, and send those out to the Gulf of Mexico to create ocean dead zones too. So that's kind of where that's where the topsoil is largely going. So, this is one of the reasons we care about, so this is, some of the reasons that we care about it. Zach here says 80% of plants have a relationship with fungi, which can be killed by biocides and tilling too. Yes. So the fungi and bacteria really are things that do a great job of keeping the soil alive. We know now that soil is not just dirt. Soil is very alive with fungi and bacteria and all sorts of microbial life and insect life. Soil is very alive, and it is the soil life that that really powers our agriculture and keeps soil healthy, keeps soil in place. Once we treat soil like dirt, as Zach said, as soon as when we spray biocides, insecticides, and herbicides on the soil, it really causes a dramatic die-off of the soil life. And when we till it, it causes this die-off of the soil life, and then the soil just washes away. So that's why we have a soil emergency on planet Earth, and it makes a big deal. The other reason why we're talking about it is because it's one of the most practical ways to help in our growing, our gardens, and our food systems. Well, once we stop treating soil like dirt, we can start treating it in ways that really improve our yields. Healthy soil makes healthy produce, makes healthy people. So we could also talk about another soil emergency, which is the decline of nutrients in our food. And this can be increased also by caring about our soil. Noah mentions that plants secrete sugars into the soil microbiome, which feeds the microbiomes, and microbes poop and pee, and those are nutrients which feed the plants. That's right. So a healthy, alive soil feeds our plants in a very natural way. Okay. Any other thoughts about why we should care about soil? Anyone want to mention anything else? It's a good start for the night. Okay. Well, we're going to start talking about what is soil. I think all these kind of the soil talk. So we start with design. What is soil? If it's not just dirt, what is soil? And we're going to give a couple different perspectives on it. And one perspective is kind of an old view. As I was saying, these days soil scientists are saying that we're practically like in kindergarten when it comes to understanding soil. So I'm going to give you this old view, the kindergarten view, or maybe this is the preschool view since we're in kindergarten now. And then I'm going to give you a more, I think, modern perspective on what is soil as well. Oh, maybe you recall this from school, maybe probably not kindergarten, but So soil, the old view is that soil is many things. It's a collection of weathered minerals. Basically, the earth is made of rock. And the rock weathers and has chemical reactions with itself, and certain minerals are released through the weathering that that have chemical reactions with other things. And so those mineral particles, a big part about weathering is ice. You know, Glaciers till the rock and till it into particles. And so soil is one thing, it's rock particles. It's weathered minerals that make up rocks, the rocks of the earth. And gases, of course, the atmosphere mixes with soil as well. And so it's very important to understand that soil also contains gases. Soil holds a lot of water. So soil is water and a water collection organism. And of course, soil, we now know, is these living organisms and the dead organisms, which we call organic matter, once living things. So this is basically what soil is. It's a collection of all these things. This is the old view. We'll talk about some different views. So if you have different ideas about what soil is, then maybe we'll get to those, or you can mention them. Oh, this is a famous soil thing. If anyone knows of the dirty version of this, the not school appropriate version, you can add it to the chat. There's a funny version. I'm sure you've seen it. Some people in here have seen it. I might share it in the Transformative Adventures group. So this is the soil texture pyramid. And what this shows, that as the rocks of the earth weather, they weather into particles of about 3 different sizes. The largest particles are sand, and the smallest particles are clay, and in between the particles are silt. So as we talk about soil texture, this is called soil texture, not to be confused with soil structure. We're always talking about clay, sand, and silt, and the different combinations of these. And if you've gardened at all, you usually know that if you just have clay, you have a tough time gardening. Because clay, the particles are so small, it's difficult for water to move through them, as we saw in our last couple classes ago when we were watching landscape hydrology. So if you only have clay, conventionally, in the old thinking, you might have a problem with soil drainage, and your plants could die from having wet feet. If you have sand, then you have really great drainage. The water can move really easily through those large particles, and so can nutrients, but there's not much to hold water or nutrients. So the problem if you have sand is that the garden can be too dry and lack nutrients. So generally speaking, we want to be somewhere roundabouts in the middle of here. Yeah, we're gonna circle it. The goody area is usually right in here, about, that's all pretty good, right in there. If you got that, you got no problems. What's luckily, most soils are approximately in this kind of range. This is the old way of thinking. In the new way of thinking, actually, this isn't as much of a problem at all anymore. There's really no ideal form of soil in the new way of thinking. So we're going to talk about that, why. Any thoughts about this or questions? This might be, I want to mention it. I think you're all pretty sophisticated as gardeners on this call, so you've probably seen this before. if we were having a live class, even if you were familiar with it, we would do this thing, which is the bottle test. So for the bottle test, you go and you grab your a soil layer, like your topsoil layer, and so you'll grab that topsoil layer and dig down with a spade, and you'll put it into a jar like this. Has anybody done this test with their soil? I do this every time I do a live PDC. We do this usually around the start of this class, and then the soil sits there through the class, and we check it out at the end. So this is a way at home you can test shaken, not stirred. Shaken, not stirred. Yes. An appropriate time for a Sean Connery accent. Yes. Show the clay layer. It's not a planch layer. Okay. The silt layer. So, Schwamp Connery. So, you put the soil in the bottle and you shake it up. And what happens, of course, the largest particles settle out first, usually in about a minute. Those are sand. And then the next layers that settle out are silt, and then finally clay. So then we can measure those and see what percentage of our soil is sand, what percent is clay, and what percent is silt. And we can actually identify and pin it right here on our soil texture chart. I find these fun to do. I do it at pretty much every garden I do. So, anyone have thoughts or comments or questions about that thing, about that test? But it doesn't, soil texture is not, it's not the only thing you need to know these days. And it's much less limiting in a permaculture system than it is in a conventional garden system. In a conventional garden system, the only thing to really do if you have clay or sand is add compost, add organic matter. And hopefully, that's the idea. If you add organic matter, the organic particles will fill up the clay layer. Oh, by the way, this picture is missing one thing, which is all the organic particles. Those will usually float at the top or settle on top of the clay layer, and we can actually calculate what percentage of our soil is soil organic matter using this test as well. There are probably more accurate ways, but that's a pretty decent school science fair way of calculating your soil organic matter. All right. So that's the rock part of soil in the conventional view. And the soil, the live part of the soil in the conventional view is, this stuff, the soil food web. It's the plants that take the energy from the sun, and the plants exude sugars into the soil and other chemicals and other secretions that the plants will eat, or that bacteria and fungi eat and break down, and insects, plants die and the insects eat that, the dead plants or live plants, and bury them in the soil. And so all of these critters live in the soil and constantly eat each other. The soil is brutal. The soil is vicious. Just a bunch of things eating each other in there. So that's a major part of what the soil is doing. And the dead things are essentially soil organic matter. So to talk about another soil crisis, and a way we could care about soil, is if we look at agriculture, global agriculture, the actual ideal for agriculture is to have 2% organic matter. And as soon as you start digging the soil, and as soon as you start spraying the soil, That's really hard to do. It's really challenging. Organic does a lot better and no-till does a lot better, but it's really tough to do agriculture and keep the soil at that 2%. So 2% is the place where the plants and the soil start becoming a whole lot easier to work with. So that's the agricultural goal. And it's almost impossible to hit. But natural ecosystems will often have between 10 and 40% organic matter or higher. Some, as you see at the bottom here, later on, we're going to talk about two types of soils, mollisols and histosols. Histosols are made by wetlands. So here's an important thing tonight to understand. Soil is made by ecosystems. Ecosystems make soil, right? So once the soil has been weathered, it's ecosystems that continue to process that soil and create the soil, especially the soil organic matter. So these special soils, like wetland soils, can be as high as 90% organic matter in some cases, and just a teensy bit of weathered rock particles and minerals. So a lot of people have put a number on the permaculture ideal at between 6 and 12%. That's just one that, like Bill Mollison used. I think Jeff Lawton has used that too. So it's just one potential ideal is 6 to 12%. And it shows that we have a huge potential to sequester atmospheric carbon in the soil to stop climate change, right? So small percentage changes in global agriculture can equate to huge amounts of atmospheric carbon being sequestered permanently in the soil, if we can get that right. So, just giving a little space in case anyone has thoughts or questions, comments. So this is the old view of things. And I would ask, sorry, I'm looking at, someone sent me a message. So what's wrong with the view I just gave you? You know, the short answer of it is that it's a very mechanistic, reductionist view of soils, and that can lead us to some problems with managing soils. When we think about it this way, all the previous soil science was really looking at how to be valuable in a capitalistic system. How can we make money doing this soil science stuff? What they were really looking for is to dissect soil and find some particle, some part of the soil that we could sell to people to make some money. So it became a very mechanistic idea, like the soil itself is a machine to grow plants. And what we need to do is find parts that we can put back into it if they're missing, right? It's like a machine, and if it's missing a certain nutrient or a certain organism, then we need to put that back in the machine, and the machine will run better. So it's a very mechanistic view, and very much based on the idea of finding something that's missing so I can market to people and make some money. So, you know, one idea with the old paradigm is that the key is, if you've got a soil problem, no matter what your soil problem may be, maybe your soil lacks fertility, maybe your soil has too much sand so it doesn't hold fertility, maybe your soil has too much clay so it doesn't drain well. What you need to do, or maybe your soil is missing certain biology or missing certain nutrients. What you have to do is buy the inputs to regenerate your soil so that you can grow whatever arbitrary crop you want to grow better, right? That's kind of the old paradigm. What I'm hoping to leave you with today is to think systemically, understanding that natural succession and nature itself, ecosystems, will regenerate themselves, will regenerate the entire ecosystems, including the soil for us. And what we need to do instead is choose crops and crop systems that meet our goals, match the soil that we have, and work with nature to move our soils in a healthier, more productive direction. So it's a very different idea. The first one looks at soil as just a machine that we can tinker with. The second one understands that soil is part of an ecosystem, and the best way to manage soil is to holistically manage the entire system. We're going to be talking about exactly that sort of paradigm. Checking in on the chat here. Noah added an interesting discussion of how ecosystems rapidly recreate or create soils by Jonathan Bates. I don't think I've seen that one, and I'm very interested because yes, ecosystems can rapidly create soils. Now that's an interesting thing right there. Let me ask you this question. What is your soil fertility management system? What do you use in your garden? Are you tapping into the power of ecosystems that create soil rapidly to feed your garden? Or are you still stuck in the mechanistic worldview of that your soil might lack something and you got to take it and import it and put it in there into the soil to make the soil machine work better? Interesting question. Okay, so a really great example of this is one we've been talking a lot about in the Transformative Ventures group lately. If you're into gardening, if you've been into gardening, you probably have heard about humus. People love the idea of humus. When I was getting into gardening, I was obsessed with humus and how to make humus and how to make sure my soil had humus so that it had that part so that my soil was running optimally as a machine. Well, humus was an idea that all organic matter, all things that are made out of carbon, like you and me and a tree, yes, chickpeas are wonderful, hummus is wonderful. So the idea is that carbon, like the leaf pictured here, would break down and eventually chemical reactions in the soil would turn it into stable substances called humic and fulvic acids, which we call humus. And these would be stable soil carbon that was the basic engine of how the soil machine worked. Cool stuff. And people would sell all these humus additives and stuff and techniques for increasing your soil humus. But it turns out, for hundreds of years, a lot of scientists have figured that humus probably didn't exist. And we finally now have a lot of conclusive evidence that humic and fulvic acids do not actually exist in soil. The whole theory of soil humus is not really real. It does not actually exist. That thing does not happen. So I kind of like this to pick up on Noah's joke about hummus made of chickpeas, not to be confused with humus. Here, Caitlin and the Transformative Adventures group picked up the joke and said, sad day for all hippies to find out that hummus doesn't exist, when I shared some of the studies showing that humus doesn't exist. I just love this comment so much because he nails the idea with humus too. Well, you see, hummus is merely an artifact of the hippie methods of studying chickpeas. It turns out, when examined under an electron scanning microscope, we see that chickpeas merely break up into smaller fragments of chickpeas. It's better thought of as a mechanical process of chickpea breakdown rather than the formation of a novel hummus compounds. So-called hummus is actually better thought of as a transitory colloidal state of chickpea sand. It's exactly the idea of what we now know happens with humus, with carbon. Carbon just continues to break down and be cycled through all sorts of different living beings. We know now that it can be bonded to some extent with the minerals. This is called mineral associated organic matter. MAOB is what people are calling it. So MAOB compounds. mineral associated organic matter. But even the mineral associated organic matter probably is not a stable form. Bacteria is always glommed onto that carbon in the mineral associated organic matter, eating it too. So it just continues to cycle indefinitely through this web of life under our feet. It's quite an amazing thing. And so it's quite a different idea. Here's from a slide from one of the studies, and we're just looking at this is just here for your information if you like. We're looking at the part related to soil. Of course, we know now that all scientists who were studying humic compounds were accidentally making them. In the process they were using by trying to extract them using alkaline substances. Humic substances do exist in the water, but we were making more of them by trying to isolate them in alkaline substances. In soils, humic substances do not exist. So the old view was that soil structure, water, and nutrient storage and provision were all moderated by soil humus, which we know now doesn't exist. So the new view is that microbial axis, meaning the soil microbes constantly feeding and cycling this organic matter, is what is important. And we need to emphasize the need to manage carbon flows through life, as opposed to thinking of carbon stocks as dead carbon in the soil. So this is a very different paradigm. And as of this year, a lot of people like my university extension are still talking about this idea of carbon stocks in stable humus in the soil. So it's a really radical new departure, and it makes a big difference on how we talk about gardening. Just because that's a big idea, that's a big thing for a lot of us who have been taught the 300-year-old idea that one of the most important things in soil was humus. It's a big thing to find out that those particles we thought were there are not there, and they don't possess special qualities. A lot of the special qualities are being reassigned to biological processes too. So a lot of the whole ideas about humus are probably going away. Leaving a little space, because that was pretty mind-blowing for me when I learned about it. But it made sense, because we also have this idea of carbon cycling through life forms, and the measurement of that has grown as a science at the same place. So it was time for the theory of humus to go away, because we have a whole new paradigm about carbon and nutrient cycling constantly through living beings. Okay. Biochar actually is a stable carbon compound in a lot of cases. So biochar is a very different thing than humus. Biochar is made by people, and we basically burn off all of the things from the carbon that the plants and microbes would basically try to eat. And the biochar does not break down in soil, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people are studying biochar to be able to sequester carbon. So in most cases, biochar, one, really works to sequester carbon. Now, and as we talked about in a previous class, biochar also has a lot of great uses, like it's in my toothpaste and keeps my teeth white. And it's taken as a dietary supplement. It has benefits for that. It has manufacturing potential as a thing. It's used in artist charcoals, which I really love the medium of artist charcoals. And one of the big things that it can do in temperate climates is it can bulk up compost. So if you take biochar and add it to the compost pile, the best looking science right now is that you can increase your compost size by 10% without losing any of the effectiveness of the compost. So it can make your compost spread further. I've seen one study that concluded it was 1/3, but now that's looking maybe a little iffy. It's probably between 1/10 and 1/3, but still, that's a huge thing. If we're talking about spreading out compost over a large area, increasing your compost pile by 1/10 is pretty big. Now, when it comes to temperate climates, it does not seem to have a measurable impact on plant growth, on water holding capacity, on plant health, or anything like that in temperate climates. So now we have about a decade of good research on biochar, and we haven't seen huge benefits. But in the tropics, where like the Mayo, we're making biochar, which is basically wood compounds, for those who don't know what biochar is, that have been burned in an oxygen-free environment, or there are other ways to do it. Or you can burn it in a way where you catch the gas that escapes from the wood and burn that, so that you're basically burning off all of the nutrients and leaving the carbon in place. And that's what biochar is. So we know that in the Amazon, this was done by the indigenous people. And there in the tropics, because soils are very sandy and thin and really difficult to keep things up. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that would make sense to me too, because the manure might need a little bit more carbon to increase the quality of the compost pile. Joe said that he adds it to his manure. I think that's a good addition of it too, because you're adding it again to something that's going to be a compost. You can probably add it to manure in a fairly high quantity and improve the quality of the manure and improve how far the manure spreads. But in the tropics, the stuff is magical. You can add it to soil. We have robust evidence showing it increases plant yields and increases plant health, increases the water holding capacity of the soil. Biochar in the tropics is a win-win-win. It does all sorts of amazing things. Those results have not been the same in temperate climates, but we can still use it. We can still do cool things with it, like we've been talking about. And if we're doing it in ways that are energy efficient, then it does sequester carbon even in temperate climates. It seems to not sequester carbon quite as well as it does in tropical climates, but it still does. Oh, there's your, oh, cool. Yeah, even tell us about this thing. Even if you're muted, but if you want to tell us about that, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how well you can see it. It's a paint can on the outside and a paint can on the inside with a funnel on top. And yeah, you stuff the inside and then it's got holes for air around the top and the bottom. And yeah, you stuff the inside one with sticks and then you stuff the outside of it with sticks and whatever else you can find, and you only light it on the outside, but when the outside burns, it's sucking in air on the inside, and when you open it up, the sticks on the inside are all just carbonized. They're charcoal, biochar basically. And that's, yeah, the stuff on the inside is the biochar, not the stuff that burns on the outside. So, but yeah, I mean, it was really easy to build. It was, I don't know, 30 minutes of work with a drill and some wire cutters.
Yeah, I'm going to be posting. We have a class on burning stuff coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to post some how-to DIY things. And if you want, we can kind of do them in class or ask questions about doing them in class. I've done a few of them. They're fun. We're going to talk about all sorts of cool ways you can burn stuff that also make biochar. So, and that do so in a really efficient way. Because if we don't do biochar in an efficient way in temperate climates, we can actually be polluting more carbon emissions than we're actually sequestering in the soil. So having a really good efficient thing like a device like Avon has there means that we're actually sequestering carbon instead of polluting with it. So yeah, thanks. I always love getting off on little nice topics like this. I love that we can kind of keep these topics being really practical too. So we're going to get into a few practical things in a second. So this mechanistic model that we're trying to move away from in a lot of our thinking, I think a lot of our human Western thinking is tied up in mechanistic worldviews that we're trying to escape at this time, and soil is one of these. So being really practical about some of the mistakes that this mechanistic model makes us make. The first is the idea that soil is a machine, and we can just install and replace parts like humus, or maybe the soil is missing some sort of microbe, and we can just replace that too and buy it and import it and replace it. One, I don't like this because it's just a very capitalistic sort of model of how we do things, right? You got a problem, you look for a corporation to buy your solution and you import it to the soil. So I'm much more interested in DIY, DIO, do it ourselves, do it yourself, or do it ourselves, models for how to do things. I like systems that don't require me to buy things and import things. And if we, another example is like, if we want soil to hold more water, we just buy some humus. Well, we know now that this actually doesn't work because this part doesn't actually exist in the machine, in the soil machine. If we want to grow blueberries, for example, then we have to install the blueberry app on the farm soil. Well, what's the blueberry app? A lot of people know that blueberries require acidic soil, right? Blueberries require fairly acidic soil, acid soil. So we have this idea that it makes sense if we want to grow blueberries to just import compounds to the garden that will grow blueberries well. The problem is that it's really difficult to make that work. It's really difficult to make that work. So a better model, for example, is ecosystems can moderate the soil acidity. If you want to grow blueberries, one, it's best to, here are some solutions to growing blueberries. One, if you have acid soil, great, grow blueberries. That's going to be the best way to do it. The blueberries are always going to be productive and healthy because you have the soil that the blueberries need naturally. If you don't, and if you don't have blueberry soils that around 5 on the pH, then one thing you can do is grow something like blueberries that are not blueberries. You could grow service berries or honeyberries. These can be a lot like blueberries, but they're going to grow better in the soil that you have. So then you don't have to continuously amend the soil. There's been research on it that's found that this idea of amending a soil to grow a special plant like blueberries is one, it's never economically viable, and homeowners are often very disappointed with it. So I usually, as a consultant, I don't recommend it. Then the third option, right? Blueberries belong on the mountains. They belong on blueberry soil. That's where they're going to be happiest. But the other thing we could potentially do is try to grow a little bit of an ecosystem or create an ecosystem that would be better for harboring blueberries. Things like pines and pine litter and there are other things we can do that would shift the soil towards a more acidic soil. If we create that ecosystem, then we do not have to add these nutrients. It's a completely different thinking, right? It's making the system, the ecosystem that blueberries thrive in, as opposed to the idea of importing the missing ingredient to the soil for the blueberry machine, right? So generally, yeah, if you find some poison ivy, it's a good point, often grows in the same exact soil that blueberries want to thrive in. So, sometimes it's just a little bit off of it at least. So we can push the soil in a way towards blueberry by changing the whole system. Also, a final tip about growing blueberries is, or any plants, the more organic matter there is and the more life there is in the soil, the more things are dying that the blueberries might be able to eat, if you want to put it that way. The more soil biodiversity and the more soil carbon, the more carbon being cycled in life and biodiversity in that soil, the more likely it is that the blueberries will thrive too. So if we change our whole system's approach to make a soil system that's where the blueberries are going to thrive, it's a very different approach. You'll notice this implies there's that the mechanistic view implies there's a perfect soil, right? It implies that the soil machine just is lacking certain parts. And if we can put in the right parts, we'll have the perfect soil for our garden. These days we know that's really not true at all. What we need is not perfect soil. What we need is the right soil in the right places to grow the plants that we want, and the right plants together to make the right soil for the plants to grow. And we're really thinking completely about systems. And it leads us to brute force methods. We'll talk about that in a second. Just give me a little space in case anyone has anything to chime in about. Yeah, poison ivy can be a great indicator of the right kind of soil for blueberries. Here's another thing. Let's say you have poison ivy. The mechanistic view is that if you have poison ivy, the way to solve the poison ivy problem is to go and pull out the poison ivy. This is the brute force method, right? You have a poison ivy problem. The solution is you mechanistically pull out the poison ivy. A systems thinking approach is to change the whole system. We were just talking about how poison ivy likes certain circumstances. It likes the forest. It likes a certain amount of shade. It likes an understory. It likes woody fungal duff. It likes acid. Poison ivy loves acid. So if we can change that ecology in some ways, we can defeat the poison ivy without having to pull the poison ivy. You know, this is not an approach that works every place, but to give you one example, one of my clients had an area next to their house where they had kind of a woodland garden thing, and they had pine trees. It was acid soil, and it was poison ivy growing with lots of duff, lots of like leaf litter and stuff, and wood on the ground, and creeping Charlie, and mints and things like that. So yeah, there we go. Spread lime. So one of the first things to do is you add, we added lime to the soil to sweeten it a bit, because the poison ivy went like that. The other thing we did was sowed grass seeds instead and turned it temporarily into a grass area. This was a family area where they did not want to be dealing with constant poison ivy problems for their family. So shifting that a bit to a grass management strategy with compost with a lot of bacteria. So we changed the soil to a bacteria-loving grassland, and that defeated the poison ivy without ever having to pull the poison ivy. Systemic thinking instead of brute force. Creeping Charlie, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So yeah, hopefully we're making some of these ideas practical as we go. Well, we talked about soil. Remind me when we get to poison or to Creeping Charlie. So one of the things we talked about earlier is soil texture. In a conventional mechanistic worldview or view of soil, if you have clay soil, if you have clay soil texture, you're pretty much, you have the clay fate. You'll never be able to grow plants that will rot from wet feet. And because we're always thinking we got to dig it, and it's impossible to dig, and clay is just a huge menace, and everybody gets so upset about their clay. If you change the management system, clay soils are some of our very best soils, period. Now, the difference is not to think about the mechanical view. What's the mechanical view? You got to get out and till the soil to increase the water infiltration so the water can get down and your plants don't rot. Systems thinking approach is to think about this picture again, this chocolate cake soil structure. What you're looking at on the left there is a pretty silty clay mix that we had at Lily House. There's a lot of clay in that right there. You can see those fine powdery particles. It's silt and clay. So if you can improve the soil structure is what plants do. Soil, the plants, the bacteria, the critters, soil life creates this rich chocolate cake soil structure, and it will do it out of any kind of soil, including clay soils. So what are the keys to this soil structure? Perennial plants. Perennial plants keep their roots in the soil year round, which means they're constantly secreting sugars, and the bacteria are coming and they're eating the sugars and glomming on to the soil carbon particles and making this maub, the maub we were talking about, mineral associated organic matter. They're binding up the carbon to the minerals, creating this beautiful soil structure. So perennials build soil structure, not tilling the soil. When you till the soil, you kill everything. The soil structure is completely destroyed with one tilling, and then you're back to just clay. Mulch. Deep mulch builds amazing soil structure. Other living things build soil structure. So if you have clay soil and you want to be able to grow a garden better and have an amazing garden, clay soils will make an amazing garden. If you use perennials, lots of perennials, no-till mulch, keep life always flowing on that garden bed, and you will have soil like the soil on the right here that will infiltrate water a lot easier and hold water amazingly well and get rid of the allow the problem of the heavy soils and clay soils. So this is a systems approach to clay soil instead of a brute force method. Checking in on the chat. I cover my clay with mulch. Yep, it does change it, absolutely. It's mulch that draws everything alive. That's right, absolutely right, because the mulch imitates an ecosystem. It's carbon and nutrients that will get cycled through all of the life and create amazing soil structure and nutrient-rich soil as well. So there's another practical thing. And the same thing is true if you have sandy soil. If you have sandy soil and it won't hold on to nutrients, we can do the same thing. We can use a brute force method and think I've got to import a lot of compost to that soil. Or we can use a systems thinking method and use perennials and no-till and mulch. And that will build amazing soil structure that will hold water and nutrients much, much better. So it's a systems approach instead of that brute force method. And that's what I love, because you know what? Brute force means I got to be the brute. It means I got to do work. I'd rather be lazy, not work. Right? Okay. Any other thoughts or comments, questions about that? One more idea of a brute force method. Here you go about Creeping Charlie. Does your soil hate water? Did you know that this is a thing, that soil can hate water? It turns out that soil can become what some soil scientists, there are other words, but I'm going to use the word hydrophobic, that the soil can hate and repel the water. The picture that you're looking at right here actually shows water particles held on the top of the soil. Why isn't that water going into the soil? Why isn't it being sucked into the dry soil? Instead, it's floating on top of the soil and not being pulled into the soil. So the old mechanistic view was, if the soil isn't holding and infiltrating water, what do you need? You need to fix the part that's missing, which is humus. So you buy a bag of humus and you put that in the garden, and that's supposed to fix the problem. Well, the new systems view is that ecosystems actually create hydrophobic soils. So it turns out there are two basic kinds of ecological communities, especially moderated by plants, but certain animals actually associate, and insects associate with these communities too. So one type of plant community actually thrives, its life cycle is to thrive in dry soil. So if you're a plant that loves dry soil, what do? You make the soil dry. So plants like creeping Charlie and spotted knapweed is now being studied for this. It's notorious for it. Certain other minty plants are kind of noted for this in particular. And fungi, when fungi is put into a mode of scarcity, when fungi is getting used to low water resources, fungi will go into hydrophobic mode too. Fungi can turn your soil hydrophilic and make your soil love and hold water, or fungi can turn the soil hydrophobic and secrete waxy compounds into the carbon, onto any lignin-rich materials. It will secrete waxy compounds, like creeping Charlie does, onto the soil that will actually keep the soil from infiltrating and holding water easily. So that's interesting, isn't it? So then there are other plant communities, and these tend to be moderated by, just think for a second before I say it. Have you looked around and seen soils and seen like creeping Charlie growing, and violets usually with it, and spotted knapweed, and you see that soil and it's very sparse looking and it's very dry. You know it's very dry. It holds on to very little carbon. And if there's like a log or something like that, you have put down mulch. Let's say you put down mulch on that. It doesn't help because the fungi are in low water mode. So if you add that bag of humus to the soil, or you throw down wood chip mulch even, in this case, the fungi and the soil community could make that stuff into more hydrophobic compounds and actually keep the water out. Yeah, that's why people hate it in lawns, because once these things invade lawns, they turn they start to convert the soil ecology into a hydrophobic soil ecology that the grasses can't live and thrive on. Because you know what loves hydrophilic water? Grassland. Rich grassland with lots of like bison poop and lots of plant material rotting and bacteria. The plants that thrive in that circumstance are hydrophilic, and they will actually break down the waxy compounds, and they will convert the soil back to soil that actually catches and holds water better. So we have these two competing ecosystems. We have the hydrophobic ecosystem and the hydrophilic ecosystem, and they will manage this thing for us. So what do we want to do? If we want to create hydrophilic soils, they're going to be rich soils that hold water well. We want to tweak the ecosystem towards those plants, like great green things, leafy greens, and of course, grasses can do it, but we might not want grasses in the garden necessarily, but we might have an idea for using grasses temporarily to improve the soil. But a lot of our vegetables, things like this, of course, our vegetables love water. these things can help break these down. If you just keep a lot of water in an area, if you can increase the water infiltration, maybe with something like a swale, you can also long-term defeat the waxy compounds, waxy buildup, and convert that soil. And if you do that, you've changed the ecology that creeping Charlie and spotted knapweed feed on and live in, and made a systemic change that has made it so that these other plants can outcompete them instead of them outcompeting the plants. So what we want to do is piggyback and help the good guys and push them on to victory if we can. This is a very different way of thinking about these kinds of problems. And just pausing there for a second in case anyone has any thoughts or comments, questions about that. I find that body of research that's just really thriving in the last couple of years to be absolutely mind-boggling and mind-blowing. So you can actually find out some more about that research by Googling it. I think I've shared some stuff about it on the Transformative Adventures page and the research-based permaculture page. Now, if we're being very practical about this, all we need to know is that we can look and see what dry soils are going to be like, right? They're going to be sparse. They're not going to hold nutrients well. Grasses are not going to be in them usually. And usually they are dominated by fungi. And you'll see creeping Charlie. If you want to change that paradigm, you want to add lots of bacterial compost, for example. So here's a time where I'm telling you to use compost. Or lots of green, leafy green mulch, straw mulch, things that will increase bacteria. We're going to talk about this, increasing bacteria and working with bacteria at the end of class today. So we're going to have more ideas about how to increase this bacterial association and shift the soil into this abundant sort of prairie ecology instead of the water scarcity ecology. Continuing on with just a few things. Here's a study that I love. There are two sets of studies from MSU, Michigan State University, and the Jena experiment in Germany. And they were looking at biodiversity, especially polyculture, planting lots of plants together instead of a monoculture of one plant. By the way, this is another thing you can do to defeat that creeping Charlie paradigm. If you have a weed like creeping Charlie and it's converting the soil into this hydrophobic soil, if you plant polyculture, plant more plants in there. If you do that, that biodiversity will form relationships that will again tweak the soil towards naturally breaking down those waxy compounds, building soil structure compounds that will actually infiltrate water better and hold the water better in the soil. So polyculture can do that. So this study is all about the effects of polyculture. It turns out polyculture beats brute force, is what the researchers said. That's how the researchers put it. And by brute force, they mean in importing things like compost and organic matter. So just having polyculture, just having, I think in this case, it was a 10 by 5 beds with 13 species. Once they got to 13 species, they found that the bed, the garden bed, or the prairie, really there were prairie plantings, but they were interested in food-related plants, high-value food plants. The polyculture worked better than importing compost for increasing soil carbon. Well, there's an interesting thing, isn't there? Creeping Charlie can be useful. What we're always talking about is whether we want it in a particular place. And if it's like your zone 1 vegetable garden, it can have a place even in biodiversity. If you increase the biodiversity a lot, I wouldn't treat creeping Charlie necessarily like a weed to be eradicated through brute force. I would create garden beds with lots of bacterial-rich mulch system and lots of biodiversity in it. And then the creeping Charlie usually becomes less of a problem. That's my approach to it. Yeah. So it has uses in small amounts, but if it's all you're growing, your garden isn't very valuable. So, but if we can add biodiversity, add add good stuff to the soil and shift it, then we don't have to worry about the creeping Charlie. It won't become a problem if we use the systems approach. Oh, I have some in my gardens, in all of the gardens I'm working on right now. So here's a one that blows me away. Polyculture worked better than end fixers or fertilizers at increasing nitrogen. The nitrogen is the major limiting nutrient in most agriculture systems. Nitrogen makes proteins, nitrogen makes plant wells. It's a very important nutrient in plants, and it's water soluble in soil, so it gets used up really easily. What turns out in the study, they tried adding nitrogen. They tried adding nitrogen fixers, but just having high biodiversity increased nitrogen better than adding nitrogen. So there's a systems thinking change, huh? And polyculture was dope. That's a scientific term. Polyculture was dope at improving soil structure, nutrient exchanges, and all these other factors for soil too. So we're getting an idea here. With systems thinking, all of these ways we can moderate soil, we can use polyculture, we can use mulch, right? We can design systems that harvest their own water better. These will be lasting ways to increase soil fertility, soil structure, make plants grow better in almost every sort of way. Here's an interesting thing. According to these studies, polyculture beats, mulch is still pretty good, but polyculture alone beats mulching in the garden. And mulching beats no dig, which is also pretty good. And mulch and no dig beat adding compost. So if you're doing polyculture and you are not digging and you are using mulch, you are using 3 super powerful tools in the garden that are more powerful than using compost alone. So, and that beats like even, and compost is better than like those fancy microbial sprays that people are selling on the internet now, by the way. So those have been studied and they've been tested along with mulch and compost. Mulch beat the compost and compost beat the fancy microbial sprays. And here's the important thing. It beat them for increasing soil carbon, increasing soil structure, increasing soil fertility, increasing plant growth, and increasing soil microbial mass and biodiversity. So just using mulch will increase the soil microbe biodiversity and biomass. It'll increase the microbial goodness better than a spray for the microbial goodness. So the microbial goodness spray is another brute force method. If you create the ecosystem that microbes flourish in, the microbes will flourish. Microbes flourish when you have polyculture and biodiversity and mulch, which is their habitat, right? So if you do those things, you don't need the brute force methods. Any thoughts, comments, questions? So trying to keep that all, and we'll come back in a second to talk about, we'll watch a video in a minute too. But I'm gonna fast forward for just a little bit because we're about to take a break. So if we're shifting our focus here on this, here are a set of systems that all improve your soil health in every way. If you want to regenerate soil, use natural no-till, avoid chemicals, plastics, and poisons. Plastics are terrible for your soil life, by the way. Use mulch. Harvest rainwater, right? Design rainwater systems into the garden. Use perennials, use biodiversity, use careful plant spacings, and choose your crops carefully for what you want to accomplish. Grow fertility and mulch in your own garden. And finally, balance with nature. Seek balance with nature. That's our whole idea that we don't need to have perfect soil on our whole, if we have an acre, we don't have to have perfect soil on the whole acre. We could have, we'll actually have more biodiversity if we have some areas where the soil is depleted. So we don't have to try to push the soil all the time, right? We can just make great soil in the places where we need it to meet our goals. So these are systems approaches to creating great soils. And finally, again, the big systems paradigm shift for tonight is that we can use ecosystems, natural soil creation systems, to improve our soil. Wetland ecosystems make amazing soil. We'll see this after a break. Whole forest ecosystems make soil at an amazing rate. Pasture land builds amazing soil. Biodiversity builds amazing soil. Nitrogen fixing plants are great for fixing nitrogen and building soil. Untilled mulch garden systems, even if they're raised beds, are great at building soil. So we can start to use natural systems to create soil. And then when we create gardens, we can plan the whole garden around systems that we know will build the fertility. Then we don't have to use brute force to import it or use compost, because every part of the garden has its own fertility built right into it. Remember, this is the whole transformation approach, the transformative adventures approach, is that instead of using brute force, instead of thinking about how to water the garden, we build water systems right into every bed. Same for fertility. We design the garden with fertility systems built in. Okay, for the rest of the night, I'm going to be showing you systems you can use to do exactly this. What are some amazing systems? And I think I've got some that are going to blow your mind. They're pretty amazing, cool things. And then on Wednesday, we're going to come back and talk about and workshop kind of designing and helping other people design gardens with the fertility systems built in. Okay. Let's see in the chat here. Bill Molson and Jeff Lutton said that 5 ecosystems are best at creating soil fertility in order: shallow marine ecosystems, shallow lakes and ponds, forest and prairie systems, and 5 no-dig mulch gardens. Yep, that's pretty much the same as my list. They're pretty close. They're pretty smart guys. So, a lot of modern science is backing up what those guys were saying. Bill Molson was right about a whole lot of this stuff. So if we can use these systems to superpower our gardens, then we don't have to worry so much about soil loss or fertility loss. The fertility is built right into our systems. It's a brilliant way of thinking. So, and these images show, my last garden, Lily House, and the fertility systems that were built in there, which is why I said in our water class, I never irrigated. I had water systems built into my whole garden, so I never had to water. And you could see I had an experimental bed right up here with these soils. I had an experimental bed where I was adding compost. But in a lot of the garden, like in the picture on the right, I did not have to add any compost because it had the fertility systems built right into the garden. So I didn't have to do the work. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and continue talking about this stuff. If you joined this class, this was kind of a great preview, I hope, on a transformative approach to soil and soil fertility. So if yes, I did get a question. I will answer really quickly again. And someone was asking me how I designed garden beds so that they also harvested soil or harvested water. And I guess I'll get into that after break because I don't have the have a slide up of that right now on this slideshow, but using tools like water infiltration basins, routing them from the roof water and rain barrels so that the water from the rain barrels just flowed into these beds, wicking beds that were designed like underground ponds that would hold water and wick it up to the plants, and having great soil, investing in the soil, using mulch, using all these techniques, so that the beds were kind of designed to be passively irrigated from the house so that I didn't have to do the work of watering. Thanks for the question. So we're using the same approach for soil fertility too. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining. If you were joining from Bread Theory, I hope this was interesting. I hope it inspired some great discussion over there. And if you would like to join the whole class, I'll send Zach a message with a link if you want to. And if you feel like joining the rest of the class, you can join for the link. It's for the rest of this class, I made it $30 for the whole class. So if you want to join, that's what it is. No one's ever turned away for an inability to pay though. So if sorry, Zach, I'm sending a bunch of people your way. Hopefully they'll contact you. If you want to join for after break, please get in touch with him or me, and I'll send him the link. Oh, he has the link. So let him know, and I'll let you know how to send me some goodies too. I'd appreciate it. All right, everyone, thank you so much. We're going to take a break and come back in 10 minutes. Let's make it 15 minutes. So it was 7:50. We'll get started again. All right, thanks. Please also feel free to hang out and use the space and get to know each other if you like. If anyone has thoughts or comments or questions for anybody else on this call.
All right. Well, that was our free sneak peek of a permaculture design course. This topic tonight was on soils. And wow, I mean, I thought I knew a lot about soils already, but Mike always manages to throw in a lot of stuff that I had no idea about. I didn't know about the exudates, the things that Creeping Charlie leaches out, the waxy substances that actually make the soil hydrophobic. That's amazing. I had no idea just how much plants can change the actual soil structure just through that sort of thing. So very cool. If you do want to continue on with this class, I'm going to find the link right now for the Zoom meeting, and I will throw that up for you in the chat here. And then Mike will communicate with you about how you can pay. So keep in mind, if you do want to join the rest of the class for tonight, it will be that $30 fee. So I'm going to put that right at the front. Let's see here. And then I'll add the link on. So there you have it. If you would like to join, that is the link. But keep in mind, it's $30, so that's what you're getting into. Not sure why it reposted that, but hey, that's fine. That's totally fine. So yeah, exciting stuff. I always love learning about permaculture. I love doing permaculture. It is definitely one of those things that I want to make at the very least a part-time career, and I want to do it right here. I want to do what we did tonight, only instead of passively watching someone else's Zoom call where they host the classes, it'll all happen right here. So if you were a student in the class, you would have the option to even appear on camera and ask your questions right there. You get priority in the chat. But that way, the way that I would think of things, and this is just the way that I feel about permaculture. I don't judge anyone who does anything different than the way that I think about it. But how I conceive of permaculture is it should be as open and freely available as possible. If for no other reason than it is the best set of principles and ideas to combat climate change, which is already upon us, that I have ever come across. And beyond that, it's not just a way to combat climate change, but it's a way to really build the interconnections in community. It dovetails so well into all the other sorts of things that I talk about here in food security, in housing, energy, transportation. All these things have to do with permaculture as well. Even down to city design, the way you put your city together and have it operate, the way that various components interact with one another, can all be enhanced with permaculture ethics and permaculture principles, and the various techniques that have become common amongst permaculturists. So it's just great stuff. If you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask. Otherwise, I already did a 3-hour stream earlier today, so I'm a bit tired, and I think I will end it if there's no further discussion that you all are interested in engaging with about the permaculture stuff that we learned tonight, or just permaculture in general. So as always, I'm going to pull up my own link again. So there's the link. It's been up on the screen for transformativeadventures.org. That's Mike's website. You can learn about all the classes that he offers. You can start joining some of the classes if you so choose. And then also I left a link earlier to the Facebook group. That Facebook link is to the Facebook presence of Transformative Adventures. It's a public group, open to anyone. Just make sure you answer the questions as you join. And it's a real great place if you're just getting into permaculture and wanting to, well, I mean, actually for all levels of permaculture, I should say. There's people from all different backgrounds, all different climates, all different skill levels and knowledge levels, all different levels of familiarity with permaculture. So it's a fantastic place all around. Can't recommend it enough. So there was that link there too. But if you would like to support this stream and get me a little bit closer to being able to offer permaculture design certificates, like real design certificates, so like you would sign up for the class, I would also do a pay what you will sort of a model, because I believe this sort of stuff should be open to everyone regardless of ability to pay. So we would just start right off the bat. It would be a suggested donation or suggested price of $720. That's $10 per credit hour of the class, but it would be open to your own interpretation and whatever you could afford. We have the lovely Amanda sneaking around in the background. Oh, I was trying to make herself small.
No, I was trying to get on camera, but I can't.
Oh, get on camera. Oh, yeah, you're going.
Advertising?
I'm just talking about how I want to do an online permaculture design certificate course eventually. And I'm just kind of talking about how I would structure it and how it would be broadcast on all the places that I stream to. Mm-hmm. But the people that sign up for the course and pay for it would be the ones who could get the certificate. So tonight's class is about soil, all the different components of soil science. But yeah, I was just talking about my own ideas. So it would be pay what you will, suggested price of $720, which is a pretty good deal. That's $10 per credit hour. Permaculture class is a minimum of 72 teaching hours. And then you have a final project, and there is a talent show. That was a requirement from Bill Mollison to have a talent show at the end of it. So I would hold true to that. We would have some sort of an online talent show for anyone who was interested. Definitely not be mandatory. So yeah, but a good way to help me get towards that goal is to help support me and sustain me month to month. So I already have a couple people that have signed up for the Patreon, but if I get enough people where I'm making like even a part-time income, well, then I will seriously consider just giving away the course for free to the first batch of people that sign up for it each time. And And ideally, I'd be doing about 4 of these courses a year. So every 3 months, have a new group of students. And you want to show our kokedama there? No? It's looking good. It's looking good. This technique, hold it up more. This is a indoor gardening technique. It's called kokedama. Basically, you take a ball of earth, like a root ball.
This is weird.
Okay. And then you wrap it in moss, basically sphagnum moss. You can buy these moss carpets. Those are an easy way to do it. And then you just wrap wire around it, and you hang it up. And it kind of looks like you can't usually see the wires that well from a distance, so it kind of looks like a little floating island in your room. So that's the whole idea. But they do require to be soaked every week because you tend to use plants that are grown well as epiphytes. So if you're familiar with that term, it's a plant that grows on top of another plant. So you would see this in the rainforest a lot, like in the crook of where a limb meets the trunk. You have a little pocket, dirt would form, a plant would grow there. It could be an orchid, it could be a fern, it could be any number of things. But they're used to getting a lot of water all at once. Oh, bromeliad, yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah, they love this.
Yeah.
They love this. Do it to them if you have one. You can even use moss from like your yard if you live in a place that has green year round.
I don't know if that
You
moss, you can use that moss?
I have.
You've used regular moss before?
My mom had it in her backyard.
But you made that into a kokedama?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I put it in terrariums.
What one is that?
It's just backyard moss.
No, but where is that kokedama now?
My mom has it.
Oh, I'd be interested to see that one. Is the
I
moss
think
still
she
alive?
killed it.
Oh, okay.
We don't talk about. My mom's trying.
Yeah.
mean-
She's pretty early on in her plant journey, that's for sure.
See, Zach's the man for landscaping. I'm
I don't
I'm
know.
your girl if you want to talk about
You should probably
houseplants.
speak up because I don't know how well it's picking you up.
I'm your girl if you want to talk houseplants.
Yeah, Amanda definitely knows more than I do about houseplants.
He's the man if you want to talk about things you can actually eat that grow outside.
I know about permaculture, ethics and systems and that sort of thing.
I'm familiar with ethics, but not ethics of plants.
Sure you
That was
are.
a joke.
Oh, okay.
You don't get it.
No, I don't get it.
I'm trying to get on camera. It's not working. That's okay.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to pull up a chair for you?
No, because I'm gonna soak these.
All right.
Adulting sucks. Don't do it.
Yeah. Be a streamer instead.
I want to be on the stream.
Well, you can. Do you want to come on the stream on the Wednesday show again?
Yeah.
Okay. So look forward to the Wednesday show. We're going to be continuing on in Alexander Berkman's What is Communist Anarchism, also known as the ABC of Anarchism.
Babies.
And we're
Bye.
not going to sing that song throughout the whole show.
That's what he thinks.
No, that's what I know.
No, he's just playing.
We're not getting copyright struck for a crappy pop song like that. Let me just put it that way.
They don't know.
Well, the algorithm knows.
Algorithm don't know nothing.
Okay,
He
well,
got nothing on me.
we're not going to test that
He
theory.
does.
Okay, go soak your balls. Your plant balls. That's what I meant to say. Like the kokodam.
Keep explaining it. That makes it better.
Yeah, it does make it better. That's usually how jokes work.
This is my life,
You
guys.
keep explaining them, and they just get funnier.
Yeah, explaining. Same difference.
Oh, okay.
Actually.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to call it a night for tonight. Thank you all for joining me. Yeah. Everyone say goodnight to Amanda as well. Let's see who we can write into. Who is on that I know? Hannah's on. That might be nice to rate Hannah. Hannah's always a fun time. Yep, you know what? Maybe we're going to do that. Looking for another cool Twitch streamer to follow. You definitely can't go wrong with Hannah Reloaded. Oh, I'm going to get a pre-roll. Doing the cringe stream, oh, that's always a good time. She tends to cover kind of out there sort of people, right-wingers with very crazy conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists in general, flat earthers, sovereign citizens, and tonight it's the cringe stream, so it's going to be I'm not exactly sure which way she's going to take that, but it's always funny. So good time. Check out Hannah Reloaded. I'll link to that in the chat right now before we raid. Great channel, Hannah Reloaded. All right, let's start the raid.